Okay, welcome to this afternoon's work session. Appreciate everybody being here. We will start off by asking if there's any items on the preliminary items for next BOC meeting that any of the commissioners would like to discuss.
I didn't see anything. Yes.
All right, well, we'll go right into our work session items. First one is the fence text amendment in residential architectural standards, and I think Mr. Jicky will be presenting.
Chairman and Commissioners, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to be presenting two items. The fence and also an update on the last time we presented, we were asked to go to ACCG to talk about what they are doing with regards to residential architectural standards, and we did that. So let me start with the fence. The fence has some text amendments that we want to clean up. The ordinance references repairs and replacement. Repairs we understand, but replacement, it's when the whole fence is being replaced. And if it was placed prior to when permits were required, we usually get complaints, neighbors fighting about the fence. So in order to make sure that when you're replacing your fence and you're replacing the whole fence, that you come and get a permit, so that we can assist in at least knowing that they have a permit to put up the fence, and the height and the new fence ordinance kicks in. It talks about the rough and the smooth side and all of that stuff so that it's done properly. So we would like to delete B, Article 6E1B, that is highlighted on top, and the proposed update is to delete it. It cleans out the language and makes it that if you're replacing a fence, it does not stop you from repairing. You don't need a permit to repair. But when you're replacing, then you need a permit to do it. So that at least we know that that the fence has a permit. We'll be able to regulate height and how it's being installed. So that is that, and the fence also is referenced in Chapter 18 on the building code, where it talks about something a little bit different, where it does not require a permit. In next slide, please. Let's see if I can.
Mr. EGK, can we go back to the first slide?
Okay.
About the replacement and...
Okay, yeah. So...
Okay, I'm looking at the proposed update. And it has the lines to it, but it has delete.
Yes, we are deleting subsection B, because
okay,
that's what we're having an issue with. Okay. When they come to replacement and they are building a complete fence altogether.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the next slide shows them.
Okay.
Yeah, on the fence part, in terms of repair and replace, okay, they are on this slide.
Okay.
Because you have the current code and the proposed update is to delete that section B, that subsection B.
Thank you.
Okay. Next slide is where Chapter 18, which is the building permit, where we regulate the building permits. It talks about exceptions for getting permit, and it mentions in number 3, fences not over 6 feet, which is not really what it's supposed to be. All fences has to be actually permitted so we know where it's going. So we want to delete that section. Next slide. So on the proposed update is to delete the subsection 3, where it's talking about fences not over 6 feet high. To delete it, it cleans up the language, telling everybody when they're coming to do a fence, they need to apply for a permit. So And in residential fencing, we try to help our citizens that are coming to get a fence, where we are using the GIS map to kind of show them what we see, and so they can go there but encourage them to get a survey if they need. As you all know, we get lots of complaints when property owners are arguing about property boundaries. We don't get in it because those are civil matters. So we try to get it as much as we can up front to help them to make sure that the fences are installed properly per the current code. So those are the changes that that I'm proposing the Board of Commissioners allow us to make and give us the permission to initiate the process of doing it, because it has to be advertised because it's in the zoning code.
All right, any questions from Mr. Ejike? So by permanent, make sure that it makes sure that everybody who is requesting the fence is using the same guidelines.
Yes, sir.
Any questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Ejike.
Okay, thank you. And my next slide is just an update, where in the last meeting about ACCG, we contacted ACCG, and in our contact and discussions with them, they did share with us that they do not get into local jurisdictions, what they can allow or not allow. All they do is try as much as possible to make sure that the state doesn't pass anything stringent that's going to prevent us from, or rather prevent the commissioners from regulate their own county the way they want. So having said that, it kind of was good news because last time it came up, we did not contact them, but we actually spoke to Tad Edwards, the Deputy Legislative Director. That's who we spoke to. So he said no, that the Board of Commissioners have a right to regulate the county the way they see fit, that all they intervene with is when the state wants to put in something that is stringent, that limits what you'll do, that's when they intervene. So with that, we would like to advertise the residential and architectural standards that we presented to you previously, to advertise it, and it will come to a regular board hearing for approval.
Did you speak to the, oh wait, can I speak?
Commissioner?
Yes, did you speak with the policy advisor? Todd is one of the folks, but there is a policy committee through the association that has been working on this. So the specific ask was to contact them so that we can see where they are in that policy proposal, so that we're aware as we move forward as well.
Well, when we called over there and explained what we are looking for,
Okay.
they directed it to him. And it wasn't a yes or no answer. We actually had an engaging conversation. When we got him, we spoke for about 20 minutes or more. So we asked and explained, because we didn't know a particular person to ask. We said, okay, who it will be responsible and knowledgeable in what we're trying to do in Clayton County. And after a couple of phone transfers, they say it's him. Then when we got him, he really explained to us what they do, and say he doesn't have any problems with what we want to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from Mr. Ejike? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item is Terry Boulevard presentation by Georgia GDOT, or who is, okay, here we go. And I recognize Dana Lemon, our District 6 GDOT. 13, I'm sorry. Where I get 6 from. I'm putting you in another district.
I know, right, Mr. Chairman, members of
13.
the board, nice to see you guys. Thank you again for the opportunity to come and bring an update for you guys on safety on one of our major corridors. Before I begin, I don't know if Ms. Matarco's here. Not here.
He's not. He's
Okay.
taking care of issues.
Okay, all right, I just didn't want to begin without, anyway. We have staff here that's actually going to do the presentation. These are the subject matter experts that we've brought with us today. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to meet our new district engineer, Paul Denard. He is the district engineer for District 7, which is Metro Atlanta. As you guys know, the state of Georgia is divided into districts for the purposes of Georgia DOT. He is a long-standing, long-term, hard-working member of our staff, and we're excited to have him in leadership now. We've also got Justin Hatch. Justin works in the district. He's the district traffic engineer, and his focus is actually on safety. And then we've got one of our consultants with us today, Dwayne Tedder, and Dwayne is with the consulting firm of AECOM, and he too has expertise in safety. So they're going to actually be doing the presentation, and hopefully it'll answer some of your questions, and we'll have time for some Q&A. Thanks again for allowing us to help.
Thank you, Ms. Lemon.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, commissioners. Just wanted to introduce this important and relevant topic. Terra Boulevard has been on the radar for the department for some time now. It has been one of our highly rated safety action corridors that we've had a lot of issues, that we've had a lot of crashes, fatalities. And today, as a result of some of the requests from not only the citizens but yourselves, we wanted to publicly just answer any questions, give the public an update, give you all an update on where we are and the work that we've been doing at the district and at the department level. We've had our state office involved, with our state safety office involved. And essentially today what we'll be showing you are crash numbers. So a lot of folks say a lot of activity is happening. I want to show you all a little bit of the data and the numbers behind everything that we've been taking over the past few years. We wanted to talk to you a little bit about the results of some of the studies and the screenings that we've been doing, crash screenings, crash studies, so that you can get an idea of how we're analyzing that data, taking the numbers and making the story about what's going on. And also some of the projects. You know, it's not just enough to just see what's going on, but what are the actions? What are some of the things that are in the pipeline, planning project-wise, that we can fund and that we can do to address some of the concerns. So I'm going to introduce our district traffic engineer, Justin Hatch, to come up and start our presentation, and we'll do the Q&A. Thanks.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having me. This is one of my more favorite parts of the job, to get to interact with the community and feel like the value of my job, and I haven't gotten to do that face-to-face. This is the first time in over a year and a half, so thank you for that opportunity, and nice to talk to you all today. So I have kind of 4 separate sections. I can give an overview of the corridor and what we've been looking at for the last 2 years that I've been here, but I know Paul and the district have been since before I got here, and 3 key projects. I did want to take a moment just to see if you have any key pressing items you would prefer I focus on most for the corridor.
I think, well, I'm only speaking for myself, but interested in seeing the presentation, and
Sure.
I will have questions to follow.
Absolutely. All right. So we'll, and I do have some brief pauses in between each of these sections, so maybe that'll be a great time for those questions. Thank you so much. So this was a response to, I know Ms. Lemon had reached out to us just recently, I think it was at the end of last week, about the crash numbers that she had seen on the corridor. And I believe the number she quoted us was 25 fatal crashes so far in 2021. We weren't able to find all 25, 24 of them we found, so I think that number is fairly accurate that was reported. And I know her immediate concern was wanting to know, is that a high number? Is that a number that should concern us? And what does it mean to us? And so I've tried to chart it just a little bit. Certainly it's fairly easy to see following this just simple line graph year from year from 2013 through 2019, just that crashes are roughly on the rise. I wouldn't get too carried away with the big spike in 16 and drop in 17. Crashes are somewhat random. But if you follow the general trend, we're up from about 20 on the state routes and about 30 on all of our routes within the county to more of a 30 to 50 number. And so it's a clear trend up. I tried to put a trend line on it. It didn't look to make very much sense, so I took that off. But that you can conclude, and we're not going to hide from that. It's what my job is, to try and counteract that number. I think, looking at the whole county and all of its roads can get a little bit daunting, and so we try and, often look at low-hanging fruit. 53% of the fatal crashes, not all crashes, but just the crashes that resulted in a fatality, were not with a vehicle, were a vehicle striking a non-vehicle. So either a vehicle departing the roadway and hitting a tree or a pole or a ditch, or even a vehicle hitting a pedestrian. And so over half our crashes aren't vehicles on vehicles. So that's a big piece of low-hanging fruit, we think. Within that subset, over half of those, 37% of the total, were actually pedestrian fatalities of a car striking a vehicle. And so I think that's pretty telling, and it is when we met with y'all about in 2019, I think what the trend we wanted to counteract. And so this is kind of reassuring us that we think we're on the right path with a lot of the projects we're prioritizing for Terra Boulevard right now, and certainly can prioritize for the county. So 2021, again, back to that number of 25, 24 so far for the year. If we project that out, we're expecting 45 to 50 for the year. I will note that it's a statewide trend. We've shown 2013 through 2019 because 2020 was definitely a weird year for data, and we don't have it finalized yet, and definitely don't have 2021 finalized yet. But if you look at 2019 to 2020, there was, I think, a 13% increase. In 2020 to so far in 2021, we're seeing about a 16% increase. So just 2019 to today, we're seeing approximately a 31% increase. That's statewide. And so if you were to adjust that to this corridor, we're just above 31%, like 32, 33%. So we're pretty much following a state trend. It's a troubling trend we want to counteract, but I hope you all understand it is something that's not unique to Terra. It's something that we have to tackle with the unique challenges that Terra presents. So I do just want to briefly touch on all the projects that we've done and are working on. We completed a pedestrian enhancement project along Terra. It was a handful of intersections. Just real quick, Battle Creek, Sherwood Drive, Flint River, North Ave, all those driveways at Kroger, SR 138, and Mount Zion all got pedestrian enhancements. So you would have seen concrete islands going in that pedestrians can cross to feel safer while they're getting across one lane of a roadway, as well as extra signage, high intensity crosswalks, just striping that makes it pop where those pedestrians are going to be. And so that was a big priority for us. It's certainly not the end all be all for the corridor, but it was something we were able to do quick, and we did in 2020. We also are actively working on the resurfacing project. We made sure when we went through there to add in any missing pedestrian ramps, any missing crosswalks. I drove it today. There's certainly a lot of striping that we need to get finished up out there, but we're confident that will leave the corridor in a very good shape, and better than we resurfaced it. It's not just fixing potholes, but it is enhancing the safety of the corridor, that resurfacing project. Coming up, we do have these two PI numbers that I've put here for you. They're at North Avenue and at Flint River. Both of those are left turn lane projects. They're more operational projects, but they're there, and they'll be affecting a lot of the intersections on the corridor, not just those intersections they're at. Arrowhead Boulevard is one we're targeting. Currently, if you know that area on Terra, it's median separated. You can't turn left off the corridor or onto the corridor. It's just where there's two left turn lanes going all the way down to, I think it's North Avenue, that those two very, very long left turn lanes, about a half a mile long, are. And so it was actually an operational project that I identified. Those might not be as long as they need to be. And so we might be opening up that median to allow vehicles to turn left off the corridor, not onto the corridor. But the unique thing that presents is a chance for a new pedestrian crossing as part of that design. And we call that an R-cut, which I'll get to in a minute what that is. But that project we're actively studying. There's also two R-cuts we're examining at Flicker and Cardinal that we had met with some of the commissioners, I think, in 2019 to discuss. We're working with your engineers right now to get a final study in their hands so that we can talk about it seriously. But I did want to tease it a little bit, and we can get to that. We have pictures of those in the presentation later. There's also 6 additional pedestrian crossings in addition to that Arrowhead Boulevard one that I mentioned that we have designed out, studied, ready to go. I put that study just this week into your engineer, just today into your engineer's hands so that they can look at it. Again, I don't want to jump the gun on them. I want to give them a chance to give comments on those design and the study, but we're ready to move on those soon. And then there's also the North Main Street crash screening that we did in response to the recent sad fatality that we had out there, the off-duty police officer. And so that's kind of a brief overview of crashes and projects we have scheduled to try and counteract them. This is a good spot to pause before we dive into any of them.
Well, and none of what I've seen was lighting mentioned. So is that part of the package?
Lighting did end up, I believe it was on a road safety audit for the corridor that we did, and lighting is mentioned as an overall corridor improvement. It was brought up as part of an analysis that we did for North Main Street as well. I didn't put it in the slides tonight because I personally wasn't 100%, but it's being deliberated strongly, and I just had a conversation today with someone in our state office who can help assign funds and is confident that if lighting is something we want to pursue, you know, something that the county needs to recognize is that lighting does have to be paid for, not necessarily install costs, but power costs and maintenance costs by the county. And so that's usually one of the things that holds up some lighting projects, but we're confident we can start discussing how to get that done. I'm good in saying that, right, Paul?
Well, in my opinion, there's certain areas that definitely can benefit by having some additional lights.
I know for sure that there were 2 mornings when I walked into the office and it was a very similar scenario. A pedestrian was walking just along the roadway and they weren't able to be on a sidewalk and somehow got clipped by a car, and they were both in dark conditions. So we certainly recognize that as a need. It's not a programmed project by any means at this point, but we can pursue it, and I'm gonna write it down right now. Fine with that.
Absolutely. Sidewalks and lights, absolutely.
Paul might have to write it down.
Any other questions for him at this juncture?
Yes.
Commission.
First, I want to say thank you, and I want to go back and say thank you to the very first meeting that we had, Paul, and of course, our representative, Dana Lemon. And then even the second meeting we had in 2019. It was very enlightening. So thank you for that. And at that particular time, we identified the areas that are spoken of. But first, I want to start with the data. In my direct conversation with Commissioner McMurray, and I have emails that showed that for whatever reason, the information in terms of the crashes are not coinciding. I don't know if it's not getting to the state, because a lot of these crashes, a lot of times, will actually result in additional deaths. So for instance, when the crash occurs, there may be those that survive the crash initially, but they succumb to their injury. So maybe those numbers are off. I know in particular of one, even though we're talking about 1941, on Highway 85, where the mother was lost. She lost her daughter, but then her unborn child, Southern Regional, was able to deliver the baby. But I was there when the grandmother had to make a decision to pull that baby off of life support. So I don't know if subsequently that's not getting reported. And we've had those conversations, and I usually send information directly over to you all. I used to send it to Kathy, but now I know to send it to you, Mr. Denard. The other area that I don't see on here that we didn't bring up when we met in 2019 that I would like for us to go back and analyze is Terra Road and Terra Boulevard, especially when we're talking about lighting. There has been several wrong-way accidents. In particular, there was one wrong-way accident that I don't know how ended up in a citizen's yard after he traveled the wrong way late at night and was in an accident. Luckily, that person survived. But, of course, we know there probably was some impeding factors to his ability to drive. But with that being stated, though, if we look at that corridor, there are a lot of issues with lighting there. And I really want us to pull that out. And I want us to pull the data specifically, not just from PD, which is where I've been personally compiling it from, but also from our fire and emergency services, because they're the ones that are always collecting that data. In particular, there was one of our own chief of fire who was severely injured in a wreck in that same area. So just wanted to bring that to our attention. The other thing is I just want to revisit Flicker and Cardinal Road, because it was my understanding when Kathy was still in the role, I know we had a conference call, and I thought we had completed that study and we were prepared to move forward with that one, because that was one as well. That was an issue to where when accidents do occur, they tend to be fatal. And most importantly, with those particular accidents, they end up in the yard of a citizen, which is kind of down the hill. I know we did extensive studies on it, and ingress and egress with our team as well, but it came down to making a decision of restricting the U-turn. And I definitely want to go on record and say that's something that citizens have asked for, and I know you all have done, and will continue to do your studies there, so I'm in favor of that. Mr. Denard and to Ms. Lemon, I'm glad that you brought up, and to you, tell me your name again, sir?
I'm Justin Hatch.
Justin, I'm sorry, Justin.
No worries.
To you as well, I'm glad to hear you all say about the fact that the lighting was required. Because even as a commissioner, I'm aware that it all doesn't hang on GDOT. And I've been specific in my comments with that. But at the end of the day, we've got to figure out a way to find funding. This is not just a state road, this is a U.S. road. In fact, we commonly call it 1941, but it's U.S. 1941, State Road 3. So if we got to do a deeper dive onto funding sources to make sure it happens, or even for our board to figure out a way to make it happen, we need to make it happen. I focus on this corridor because that's the one that I get a lot of calls on, and I work for the people who voted me in and who I serve. And so I'm glad to hear you all here today and see you here today for making time for this. And I look forward to more work on this corridor in the future.
Absolutely. We've got three of these, the three at the end, I put them at the end deliberately, that we can dive deeper into if you'd like to take that time. I can start with the R cuts if it sounds like that is most pressing to you.
They are, but I think for this audience, maybe you want to highlight some of them, and then we can have a subsequent meeting on them, and then figure out a way to relay that information to the public to where it's understandable.
Okay.
You have any
Keep going on.
questions? Okay, we're
Oh,
good.
Okay, I can breeze through this a lot better than I was before. But so this is State Route 3 at North Main Street, where we had the fatality of the off-duty police officer recently. This is just a picture of the intersection to hopefully orient folks here. Next slide, please. And so this is one of the enhancements that I was talking about. So we installed curb cut ramps in that concrete island, so that someone in a wheelchair could navigate it easier, as well as that extra striping. And there are some signs that you can't really see that notify drivers better of that crossing. And so that's kind of what you're seeing, but it will not address that crash that happened recently, or many of the severe crashes that take place. But it is hopefully going to prevent any potential future pedestrian crashes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this was a safety screening we did. I want to be clear, it's not what we typically refer to as a traffic engineering study that would result in a final recommendation. It is to look at things like crash data, traffic volumes, and overall intersection conditions, and simply identify feasible solutions and the potential benefits of those solutions, and then hopefully look at them both as engineers to scope the study that we're about to write, as well as to present them to folks like y'all, just to see, you know, what are you most interested in maybe in pursuing. And so we can dive into those if on the next slide. So just to give you some thought on the corridor, I love that you mentioned it's US 1941. The first time I noticed that on Terra Boulevard, I realized it's literally the same US route that 400 is, which is pretty telling. But so here you can see some of the volumes on the corridor. On the bottom, you see 58,000 average annual daily traffic. On the top, it shows 45,000. I looked into that, and that top one was a summer count. So we're actually right around, if you go out and count on a single weekday, you can get plus 65,000 plus vehicles on this corridor. And you can see for relevance, North Main Street is at about 8,000 vehicles per day. And so that kind of tells you in comparison. And 8,000 seems small, but that's above what we would consider, you know, a significant corridor. Like if it's under 6,000, that's a very small road to us. But once you get over 6, it's significant enough to accommodate for. On the next slide. So here's a crash diagram that we did of the corridor. There's some things I'd like to highlight. First, you can see they're kind of trying to show little pictures, angles of each crash. You'll see kind of towards in the middle a 32 with the angle crash that shows a left turning vehicle coming southbound on Terra and turning onto North Main Street. And one of those was a fatal. That was the fatal that we all know about, I think. And then also going northbound, there was a rear end crash where you see the 9, and there was a fatal there. We've also got 21 rear end crashes coming on North Main Street, so that's just the vehicles trying to merge from North Main into Terra. That's a lot of rear end crashes, a high percentage of the total. There's also a decent number of, there's 12 side crashes just from North Main Street trying to make that merge. And so that's them having trouble making that right turn into traffic. On the next slide, I hope we have, or here's some more crash data. So you'll see here there's 32 angles, which is probably, I would guess, around what we would expect for an average intersection as far as the total percentage, and about 118 crashes that we observed over these 8 or so years. And you'll see 47 were rear end though, so that's a significant proportion, especially considering we don't even have a mainline stop here. That's just a lot of vehicles that are having rear end crashes. And then the side swipes that we mentioned as well, just from those right turn mergers. And so it's kind of showing what that problem is, which I think if you drive the intersection, that's what I feel are the problems. And hopefully we're finally onto some proposed solutions on the next slide. So some short-term kind of no-brainer. There's not really any reason to deliberate over these solutions, and they can be installed fairly quickly. First, we can convert the North Main Street. It's currently a yield-controlled movement. You hop into that lane that eventually, very quickly, is a right turn lane that you're forced out of. And I drove it semi-recently, just almost by mistake, but I always was on Terra on the main line, but happened to be on North Main and made that right turn, and that right turn pops up at you. And so what this would do is actually force cars making that right turn to stop. It would not allow them into that right turn lane and force them to make a conscious decision to enter traffic, as opposed to just getting up to speed and hoping they can fit in later. And so that should reduce those side swipe crashes, and hopefully could reduce some of those rear end crashes as well. We've also got the speed reduction feedback signs that we're hoping to place around the district. We've got those on order now, and we would hope to place those periodically throughout the district. It would just tell people when they're driving too fast. Our goal is knowing that when you place those things and leave them for 2 years, people start ignoring them, and so we would kind of place them and then pick them up and then place them again, just to kind of keep people guessing almost. And certainly law enforcement, if they have any speed feedback signs, we would encourage and work with y'all on placement of those. Long term, and probably the things that are really going to address these problems, we have four ideas. I'll hit them quick and then individually. We could close the southbound left turn lane and still allow the right in, right out at North Main Street. We could realign this whole intersection a little bit further to the south, which would again make that right turn from North Main Street more of a conscious decision, as well as allow the left turners more visibility. We could also realign the intersection and signalize it. And finally, we could consider closing both the left turn and North Main Street outright. And so we'll jump into each of those on the next slide.
Before you go to the next slide, on the considerations, is there a process for the consideration for the realign or closing it? That comes from the board?
It would be primarily, for our side, it would be a traffic engineering study that would analyze a lot more than what we've brought today, but certainly the board, if y'all wanted to sit down as a county and discuss and talk about what you feel are feasible solutions, we could eliminate a solution based on that, if that's, or possibly put some preference to a solution depending.
And based on the cost and all of these, or some of these future countermeasures of the long term, not only will we need the buy-in from the public because we're doing realignments and so forth, potentially closing off some of the approaches and doing that, but it would turn into more of a longer term project to do that. So that's something that we will be in coordination with the county staff and so forth about.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to go ahead and skip down
Yeah.
to Flickr and Cardinal.
If you go ahead about 4 slides, I think. Oh, forward, sorry. Thank you. But we can talk to you a lot more about those solutions if you keep going, I think, until you see, yes. So this is the RCUT that I was talking about. It's a restricted crossing U-turn. Commissioner Franklin sounds like she's very familiar, but just to make sure everyone understands what this does, it still allows you to turn left off of Terra Boulevard. What it would not allow you to do is if you're on a side street to turn left onto Terra Boulevard, you're forced to turn right, make a U-turn, and that is how you make a left turn onto the corridor. If you need to go across, you would turn right, make a U-turn, and then turn right again. And so that's kind of what we're about to talk about at these two intersections. So this is I think more towards the south of the corridor on Terra, in a very residential area between Terra Road and McDonough Road. Two intersections, Flicker and Cardinal. They're both existing full access median openings, meaning you can turn left off and left on to the corridor. On the next slide, I think we have one of the designs. So this is Flicker Road, and so you can see it's actually a very simple modification. We're just going to take a little bit of concrete and put it in the middle of the intersection to prevent those left turners and round out the nose points on the medians to kind of discourage the left turn across. It would still allow any vehicles currently southbound on Terra to make a left turn or a U-turn there. And so that's what that would look like. If you're turning right from Flicker, the next design at thank you. The next design at Cardinal shows where they would end up. And so you can see they would come down here to Cardinal, which is about a quarter mile, I believe, maybe a third of a mile, to that intersection where they would turn around and make a U-turn. And so yes, that's a little bit more travel distance for commuters, but we are predicting a significant reduction in severe angle crashes. And then you can also see this design right here does the same R-cut median restriction at Cardinal, but also just immediately after the median provides that U-turn. And so these drivers would certainly be less impacted in regard to travel time. Just to provide a response, we did perform what we call an intersection control evaluation that did indicate that these were very, very good solutions. They provided a high benefit cost ratio to drivers. What we sat down with a couple of your engineers and did discuss that there were some extra details that if the community were to question why we moved so quickly on those, that we should put them into a more thorough study, and so that was the delay. We expect to have that by the end of August for your engineers to review as well as you. And yeah, so I mean that's the R-cuts if y'all have any questions on them. Just go. So the pedestrian hybrid beacons we talked about, hopefully y'all are familiar with them. If not, they're pretty simple devices. They're traffic signals designed solely for pedestrians to cross the road, essentially. They stop traffic in both directions with kind of a wig-wag flashing red, and then a solid red to tell those cars to finally stop. It allows the pedestrian to cross the roadway. Yours would have very large medians in the middle that provide a pedestrian a staging point that actually increases the safety of that design as compared to what you see here. And so these are the 7 locations, including Arrowhead, that we identified. I know they're very small on the map, but they're listed here for you. They were all identified first by looking at pedestrian crash data, and so this is a data-driven process. It's not, it's not preferring any kind of specific road or community or business or something like that. It's very much where the pedestrians, ending up in collisions a lot, and then from there we also set up pedestrian counters, video cameras, and then went back and counted them by hand to identify where the most pedestrians were. And so that's how we ended up at these locations. And we believe that these would do a very strong job of reducing pedestrian crashes and give drivers better notification and pedestrians more options. And so I think from here we just have 2 of the designs if you'd like to. This is some of it's just plotted out to kind of show what we had. We've got a lot more in-depth data, but it shows a lot of the green pedestrians are pedestrians who are hit but not injured, and then as you get to red, fatalities. And so we took that all into account. Next slide. And this is one of the designs. I believe this is over near one of the Kroger driveways, just north. It's just north of North Avenue. And so, and you can see how it crosses the median there. It's a pretty cool design. It forces the pedestrian after they cross the roadway to turn right and look at the oncoming traffic so that they don't get struck on the second crossing. But that's really what we have for you tonight.
This is great work.
Any questions?
again, I just want to, if I may,
Yes, go ahead.
I want to say thank you. I know there's much more to be done with this that you all have presented tonight is huge. I know there's a lot that also depends on education, as we talked in the past, and hopefully we can partner with with MARTA as well as with the other organizations to make sure that we drive safety home, so that we can make sure that we've got folks that are not taking risks with their lives, but also just knowing that we are dealing with the structure of the road to make it more safer. It really lets us know that we're doing what needs to be done. We know that, again, this is a state and a U.S. highway. It needs light still. Even with this work, we got to have contiguous sidewalks, and we need the lighting. We just have to dig deep and find the funding sources. Hopefully this board of commissioners can partner. I heard you clearly in our conversations, and thank you for being so candid, that in Rockdale County, they had a ribbon cutting because they got together as a board and made it happen. So hopefully we can do the same, and hopefully that we can explore all funding options to make it happen, for not just the lighting, but also the beacon lights and the continued safety. There's one thing that I didn't see though, and I know it may be a heavy lift, but it's important. It's at that top of the Arrowhead area. Because even though the amount of crashes may not be necessarily there, the severity of those crashes. Because I'm so glad to hear you say, Justin, this highway, people need to hear this, this is 400 running straight through the U.S. and coming through our county. I know it's happening all around the state. I deal with that on the ATL side, but as a commissioner, I have to respond to the citizens of this county, particularly for this corridor. And I personally think there is definitely enough for us to do an intent study for crosswalks, pedestrian walks, in particular around Arrowhead. There's a bus stop right there at the top when you get off of the expressway. And I've even talked to Marta about that stop. That stop is not even within probably a quarter of a mile, not even a tenth of a mile. So you got people that are excelling from a light, visibility is low, and there's a bus stop right there. There's no pull-off for that bus. Those people are trying to get to that stop. So there has to be a crosswalk evaluated, and then also we need to reevaluate even the structural design for our transportation. The same conversation I'm having with GDOT is the same one I'm having with our service provider for transportation. So I realize it takes all of us.
We absolutely can look at a crosswalk in that area, and I think we have some data on it, so we'll crunch the numbers and see what can be done at Arrowhead.
That would be great. I appreciate you.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Actually, the next slide.
Is that for the overhead?
So this one is,
I'm
this
sorry.
one is the,
So this is kind of what I was referring to towards the beginning. It's a potential R-cut, just one directional, as well as what you get when you have that opportunity of the R-cut is a very easy way that all those vehicles are already stopping to allow the left turn. You can cross the pedestrian as well. And so this one, it's a little less, I think, certain based on when we analyzed it. It's going to cost a little bit more. The grading between Terra there is like this.
Yep.
And so it's going to cost a little bit more. It's not a project we can do with our quick response funding immediately, but it is one that is very high on our list. And I don't know if that lines up exactly with where you're talking about, but it's certainly, it's something we can look at. And just to speak to MARTA, we have worked with them. They've worked with us to realign bus stops to crossings that we can make work on our roadways. And so that's certainly something that we'd love to partner with them on.
Awesome.
So Justin quickly mentioned this quick response project.
Please come up to the mic so we can get it
Sorry, Mr.
recorded.
Chair. I was just saying that Justin mentioned the quick response projects. So some of these we will be able to address using that funding source, and we will be able to get them done a little bit quicker than others. Others, of course, are going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more assistance from our consultant. But some of these projects we are going to be able to get addressed relatively quickly and get some solutions out there so that the citizens can see that you guys are actually addressing the issues that have been brought before them. And that safety is very important. We talk about lighting a lot. You guys know that there is $1 trillion transportation infrastructure bill that's out there. We don't know what it's going to look like, the final bill, but there may be some opportunities to find funding for U.S. highways for things like safety. Safety is important when it comes to transportation, and sometimes they do put special pots of money out there just for that. But traditionally, once we install the lighting, it has been for the local governments to provide, maintenance, annual maintenance for it. And that to me, we have some opportunities to communicate to our delegation up in D.C. about changing that process too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good work.
Commissioner Amber.
Well, Ms. Lemon touched on what I was going to ask, regarding the Congress passing the infrastructure bill. Would that help in some of the funding and also?
Absolutely.
You
Yes,
touched
ma'am.
on that. Okay.
Absolutely.
And also the reauthorization bill is
We're hoping
attached
they're
to
gonna do
that.
something.
And that's additional funds that'll come down.
If they reauthorize it, the fiscal year ends in September, so we're keeping our fingers crossed that they're actually gonna reauthorize
Right.
transportation bill.
Yes,
In
yes,
addition to the additional
exactly, infrastructure bill.
transportation infrastructure.
Okay. So hopefully we could get some assistance.
Absolutely.
Financially
We
from-
anticipate an influx of funding, and
Okay.
safety will be one of those pots that they're gonna put money in,
Okay.
and we'll be able to draw from.
It's nice summer money too, so yes, they can go a long way.
It's a little bit of money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we know you got a region to think about, but you are in District 13,
So
so.
as we're talking to our federal partners, it's important that we mention that.
Sure.
Yes.
Whether it's members of Congress or our U.S. senators, that we talk to them about that. Because
Right.
sometimes we forget that the load that's placed on local governments when asked to fund, to pay that bill every month and every year, because that's a big bill when it comes to lighting.
Yep.
Definitely.
All right.
Thank you all.
Any other questions?
Just one final thing, and I brought this up some time ago. Do we realize that we still have a road named after a fictitious slave plantation? Terra Boulevard. And I know that has nothing to do with y'all. But since you were here, I had that conversation with Kathy. I have had it with even Commissioner McMurray. I want to put it on record. This board needs to take up the change of that name. It doesn't say terror, but also it's Terra. And I just think it needs to be renamed.
So with the naming of the roads, we all know that it's done by the members of your
State delegation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that authority.
Mm-hmm.
It only takes, a resolution from the local delegation
Mm-hmm.
to make that happen.
We need to add that to our request.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the presentation, y'all.
We have some paper copies.
Yes, if you just leave them on the desk, just leave them there, we'll get them afterward. That'd be fine. Thank you for your time and for the presentation and all the work that you're putting in. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we will have discussion on the board's legislative priorities and the upcoming agenda. Mr. Stanford, I believe. So the reason why I asked for this to be on is I've received notice, as well as everybody here, reference to the presentations for legislative priorities that the state delegation hears every year. And I wanted all of us to be on the same page in terms of what priorities we as a board will look at and consider. I've got some recommendations from staff as well as from our command staff as well. So Mr. Stanford, please.
All right, Chairman, Commissioners, hope all is well with you. We're pulling up those legislative agenda items or priorities that we're looking to provide recommendations to the board around. But as she's pulling them up, I will try to go through them to kind of give you some context to what those items are, and hopefully if you have any feedback of areas you would like to see either revised or removed or added to that policy initiative. First one is funding broadband deployment. This is kind of dealing with the local broadband development, from an infrastructure standpoint, whether we're using ARPA funds or we're utilizing federal dollars to help us with this. We want to continue to have our state delegation to help us with addressing those underserved or underserved or either unserved areas of our community to ensure that we can get broadband connection throughout our community. Second is elections law revision. As we're all aware, based upon some of the changes that the state have made as it pertains to elections, some of those revisions are asking that we take into account these unfunded mandates, whether it's training to our staff, whether it's providing additional information to our citizens about the new laws that may be in place. We want to ensure that our state delegation have an opportunity to provide us funding in that space. The second, or the third, is kind of in line with the presentation from GDOT and Representative Lemon and the staff. Request state and federal funding to support safe routes and major corridors development along major thoroughfares, mainly Terra Boulevard. I think the conversation led to some major areas that we talked through, whether we're talking about behavioral changes to help our citizens understand from an educational standpoint, what might be some other ways we can address that. So having federal and state funding in place would help us with that. Fourth, transit funding and regional collaboration. Through our efforts from Clayton County and our economic partnerships over the last 40+ years with transient work, two of the bulleted items we talked specifically about: Clayton County continued support for long-term financing. Two is to help local government address their transient capital and operational needs to ensure appropriate integration and equitable connectivity. Lastly, Clayton County requests that the state provides ongoing allocated funding for transit. We've talked a little bit about, a lot of our work has always been centered around transportation, but we really hadn't had a liaison in space to talk about transient. So when we talk about working with GDOT and working with MARTA and some of the other thought partners throughout the community, it's important that we have staff or some type of consulting work in space to make sure we're providing the appropriate information to the Board of Commissioners. 5, support state appropriations to expand and support mental health services, including increased funding to community service boards for core services, funding for additional behavioral health crisis center, increased funding for evaluation and treatment of individuals in county jails while awaiting evaluation to determine competencies to stand trial. We've seen an escalation in costs as it pertains to healthcare costs due to COVID. We're trying to ensure that if there are some opportunities for additional funding in that space, when we have those escalation in fees and charges from the respective vendors, then we have at least some additional funding in place from the state or the federal government to help with that. The continual state support legislation around the title and tag fees to an amount sufficient to cover the cost of providing the service. There still seem to be some imbalance with the TAVT and how that funding is coming in from an automobile perspective. The tax commissioner has been working on that probably going on 4 or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, and we still hadn't necessarily got the traction that we're looking for in that space. So we ask them for support there. 7, one of the biggies, support additional funding for airport revenue sharing to meet active capital improvement requests by Clayton County and ongoing impacts from the Hartsfield-Jackson impact, or from the airport as a whole. We've been in constant discussion with them over the last year to talk about revenue sharing opportunities. Our delegation has been involved, been working directly with the Ways and Means Committee to talk more about ways for which money can come in said space. And so we want to try to figure out ways that we can have the state delegation continue to assist with that. 8, support legislation to fully inform counties when sales tax revenues of local significance authorized by the State Revenue Department and establish procedures to allow counties to accommodate significant refunds. Part of our discussion that we've had with the Revenue Department has been, in some instances, when we ask for unsolicited audits to get us a sense of where the businesses stand, some instances, because they're woefully underserved in that space, we really don't know whether or not we're getting the appropriate sales tax collections from Department of Revenue. So by having the state delegation help us in that space in either allocating additional resources there, we think that will be a major benefit. 9, promote programs that would increase economic development projects like high-end mixed use, casino gambling, or new innovative destination opportunities for increased revenue options would be something else as we continue our economic development strategy. As you heard from Crest and Clayton State and the work with the Development Authority and the Chamber, one of the main things that we're trying to do is ensure that our strategies align with the policy lens of this board, and ultimately we will need additional funding from the state to help us with that. The last one is, again, as we talk to our thought partners like ACCG, they usually provide some major priorities from their area, so we will ask the board to continue to support those major ACCG initiatives as well as it becomes one of the major thrusts with our policy lens. And then lastly, as Commissioner Franklin asked earlier of Mr. Ajike, we also added here discuss architectural design standards with the policy committee at ACCG. So those are the 11 points. The last one is not outlined on the PowerPoint, but I'll pause there to see if the board have any additional questions or additions or subtractions from this recommendation.
I have couple things. There was
Commissioner
something that was just mentioned to the DOT people.
Change the name of Terra Boulevard?
Yeah, right.
I think that's excellent.
Is that
We're a
right?
minority community with a name named after a fictitious slave.
Yeah. Okay, but
Yes.
everything on here is good. I would really love for us to concentrate a lot on this,
Yes.
the mental health.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I know the police are having a hard time with that. They've hired a couple
Yeah,
social workers
Two social
and
workers.
all, because, you know, we get these flashes all the time about person missing and, you know, with some of the things that are going on with them mentally and all. And I'm sure when they go out for these calls and all, that can be a problem. A lot of times it's not so much criminal as it is a lot of times mental.
Right.
So hopefully, you know, we can get some assistance on that. And my pet peeve here,
Okay.
the airport.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, years ago, I just, anyway, you know, they always flash in Clayton County when something about the airport. So, you know, why can't we continue to work and try to get, you know, some of those funds from there? And some years ago when this concessionaire thing, and Chuck may be familiar with that, and we had these state legislators from
Yeah, we are
a
familiar with that
particular
one.
county, right, that pushed for us not to collect. So we had started really collecting quite a bit of money from that, and the concessionaires didn't seem to have a problem, you know, because all they were doing was tacking it on to the sales receipts and that kind of thing, and the people traveling back and forth.
Right.
But it was, for whatever reason, you know, some of those legislators that insist on us not collecting. I would like for us to revisit that, if at all
Well, we never
possible.
got off of that, Commissioner. We still are on that.
Well, I
Just-
just don't hear anything about it
Well,
anymore.
we're still trying to negotiate through sort of like a pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes.
Right.
So we're still trying to have discussion with the city of Atlanta that is centered around doing just that, and that's being able to collect some additional fees, or we got to figure out some kind of way, but we got to have a willing partner with the city of Atlanta to actually get some movement on that. We've met with the mayor. When I say we, the Clayton County entities, we formed a group of folks to have initial conversation. School system, the delegation, me on this board, and I think
Cities.
the cities, a representative from the cities, and we have been having that very discussion about how we can collect additional revenue coming from the airport. And we as a board, we've spoken on that a couple of times in our executive sessions as well.
Because there's more
'Cause
than
we
one
retain-
thing. I
Because we
mentioned.
retain council
Right. I
to
remember
represent
that
our
one.
interests.
Right.
Yes.
But I don't think there was a mention of that concessionaire. That just seemed to be easy.
Yeah, that was what, 3-4 years
That's
ago?
easy money.
They said it didn't have a property interest, therefore they should not have to pay those taxes.
Commissioner, your point is well taken with regard to the additional bullet points you want to emphasize around mental health and airport revenue sharing, so we certainly will continue to emphasize that.
Okay.
And one of the things we're looking to do as a means to keep this board informed, clearly with the hiring of our lobbyists, Ohio River South, and working with our delegation, we're looking to at least bi-monthly, or at least every other month, have an opportunity for them to come and give you an update on the status of the discussions with the delegation, as well as our federal lobbyists in said space, so you can have an ongoing update as to
Great.
what's happening with our legislative agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner?
If I may, thank you. I believe that this is good work, this is great work. Also, I do believe, as it was stated, we need to move number 7 up on there because it's numbered. And so we need to let everybody know that's the number 1 priority,
Right.
as opposed to the number 7 priority. Also, the election law, I would say, would probably be right at number 2 or 3, depending on between the safe route corridors.
Okay.
The transit funding, I would move that one. I would move mental health up. Also, we just left from NACO, where it has been deemed that not only mental health, but also dealing with violence and gun violence has become one that has been deemed as a health issue for our communities. So not only should we make sure that we align our priorities with ACCG, for those who don't know, is the Association of County Governments, but also with our federal government, because of course our voice resonates when we come together in numbers. So we need to take a look at NACO and look at those things that were voted on and were passed. We can pull that from our representatives on the website. I can pull the stuff from the transportation side. That needs to be moved up. The other thing is already mentioned. I do believe, even though it's a low-hanging fruit, I think there's significance in changing the name of Terra Boulevard. That's only something we call it internally. It's not a proper name for it, so we do need to go ahead and do that and celebrate around that. And then one thing I want to mention to you as well is on the transit funding. We need to do, you mentioned it, but we as a board need to do a deeper dive, because we all have had meetings today dealing with MARTA and the direction of MARTA. As the vice chair of the ATL Transit Link Authority, I can unequivocally say that there was $100 million that was available to our county that we didn't have to do a small start program to get it. But instead, MARTA fought us getting that $100 million identified directly to our county. But yet today, we learned of a plan to do an alternative plan than the rail. And I've already let them know that I feel that if the intentions of MARTA was to really live up to that, then they wouldn't have fought that $100 million, and we would have had that in our coffers and dedicated to that expansion in that project, first and foremost, and then we could have built on it. So this is not so much for the policy initiatives, but we need to be aware of it, because as we're presenting things to our Georgia legislature to be able to fight for us, we don't want information to come out at the end. And that was something that it was on record, it was on television, it was fought by Robbie Ash, and initially the House Speaker was all for it, as well as the governor. And then all of a sudden, once Robbie Ash got on television, the whole story changed. So that was money that was guaranteed that would allow us to see that project completed by 2026. So we need to go back and flesh that out a little bit. Okay. The other thing I'm looking at is on the casinos. I like the direction of the promoting the programs for development and projects and high-end mix. I'm not keen on adding in the casino gambling, because as a board, we know that that's going to have to be a referendum. That's going to be something that's going to have to be voted on by the people, and I don't want there to be any means of it looking as if this board or us as a total has made a decision on something that must go to the public. So that's the only wording that I personally would ask that we take out, and just supporting economic initiatives and not be specific with casino gambling, because it seems like we're usurping the thoughts and the direction of our community when we know it's got to go before the community for a vote in the entire state. But other than that, this looks great, and let's keep partnering on the school system with that mental health side.
Yeah, just to expound a little bit on the mental health, the mental health board or center, as well as the hospital and the county government, has been working very close hand in hand to address some of the mental health issues and the lack of some of the services that we see around the county. We've even allocated through the SPLOS money for a center. Now the issue comes, and this is something that we need support from delegation to get the state on board, is to provide more money for operations and for staffing. One of the conversations we had about this building that we're proposing to build for mental health services, when Dr. Adams went to ask for staffing, they told him, well, we're not sure we can provide money for staffing. So that's problematic. It does us no good to build a building that's not going to have any staffing to address our community. Right. So we need to definitely make sure that we push for state funding, and I'm sure it's not only in Clayton County, but throughout the state, because mental health is a very serious issue.
Chairman, you're 100% correct. To be in line with that whole conversation around mental health, and SPOS dollars has been allocated for the Crisis Center and the Behavioral Health Center, specifically in the 2021 SPOS program. The other thing is, keep in mind, this board rallied around some of the safe corridors, like the pedestrian bridges, for safe routes within the community as well. So we're trying to ensure that we're aligning our policy lens with our outside stakeholders with the funding that this board has already allocated, so therefore we have additional resources to address the problems and the concerns we have out throughout the community.
Yeah, just one quick question. We are talking about the transit funding and all.
Yes, ma'am.
Does anybody have a count of how much money we have on that half penny?
Mm-hmm. Yes. You'll get that tomorrow, and I don't have that in front of me. one of the, when Marta gets with you tomorrow to kind of go through that, they have that allocation of what that half penny is now produced over the last 7 years. And I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I can certainly give it to you after this meeting.
Okay, well, if they're gonna present it, that's fine.
And if we could get it in writing, that would be great. An actual report would be even better.
And how much interest?
And yes, because I think I've had it text to me in the past.
Right.
That would be neat.
Yeah, that would be great if we could get it in writing.
Not a problem.
Any other questions? All right, Ms. Stanford, I appreciate the work that you and the staff has done to bring these initiatives before us, and we look forward to next step is getting with the delegation and presenting this to them, as long as this board is in agreeance that this, the numbers, Commissioner Franklin, the numbering of it was just, we just put it together, so it was not indicative of the importance. But since you have outlined or requested that it be placed in order of importance, then yeah, we'll do that and make sure that they understand that this is first on the list and then last on the list.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Board.
All right. Well, that was the last item. The ARP project recommendation will not be heard tonight. They are tweaking the presentation to add some additional information, and we will stand adjourned. Thank you.